I had checked out Teddy Long's shoot DVD from RF Video. And, it was pretty interesting. I gotta tell you, you know, he really kept praising WWE, and he really didn't have any, like, meat and potatoes, like, ooh, damn, that was kind of juicy. I mean, he pretty much had talked about how things began for him as far as his wrestling career. He basically had attended Georgia Championship Wrestling shows on Saturdays at the TBS station with a couple of friends down in Atlanta. It was pretty much free. One day he came across Abdullah the Butcher, who needed help being shown around the area. So he did that, and that basically had eventually set him up to be a gopher. You know, pretty much, hey, you know, the boys need sandwiches, they need something to drink, or they need to get to this city, or they need to get to their hotel room. So he was a gopher or whatever. And eventually he went into setting up the ring as being part of the ring crew. He got to drive the truck around with all the ring equipment in it, drive it to his house and all that. And one day they needed a referee, and they asked him if he had ever refereed before. He said no. They had him referee. I believe the first match that he refereed was Ron Bass taking on Black Bart. It was a Texas death match. Pretty much everything was history after that. He talked about how Eddie Gilbert, Kevin Sullivan played a very key part in his upbringings while being involved in the wrestling business. He also had talked about, as far as him having the ability to talk really well on the microphone goes, basically that was a result of him drinking beers with Eddie and Kevin. And he did some DJing for them right there on the spot, because he also used to do a little bit of DJ work prior to the Georgia Championship Wrestling, and they were very high on him. They wanted to do something with him in some type of managing capacity role. Ric Flair was booker at the time. He originally said no to Teddy Long, but eventually they were able to turn things around, and Teddy Long has started managing. He also talked about what it was like refereeing in the 80s, comparing it to how refereeing is today. Not really that much of a difference, although nowadays in the WWE, it's definitely critical that the referee knows the finishes to the match, knows about certain spots that's going to be happening throughout that match, so that he knows where he needs to be when something is about to go down or whatnot. Talked about working with Dusty Rhodes. He credited Dusty Rhodes for being one of the main people that really gave him his start in professional wrestling, really let him took a good peek behind the curtain and understanding the business better. As far as racism goes in the WWE, he recalled a time where Ole Anderson and Thunderbolt were talking, and Ole Anderson said, "How many niggers do we need?" I think it was Thunderbolt said, "Pretty much me," kind of like, "That's all the niggas we need." And they were kind of looking at Teddy Long as that was being said. There was another racist story that had to do with Jim Crockett. Basically, you had the Crockett plane that would be like for all the hot shots or whatever. And Teddy Long, he knew he was not supposed to be on there, but his friend, he had somebody on the plane that was trying to encourage him to get on there and grab a beer before he hit the road. Jim Crockett had stumbled across him on the plane, and he basically said, "Nigger, what are you doing on the plane?" Teddy Long was just so embarrassed. He was so disgusted. He just tucked his tail between his legs, put his head on down, rolled out. His friend was disgusted by what he saw on that plane, that he actually ended up riding with Teddy Long to the next city. You talk about discrimination and just poor standards. There was also this time where Teddy Long was trying to get paid, and they wouldn't pay him. They would not like MoneyGram him his check or whatever. Long story short, he actually had to drive like 250 miles from Atlanta. There was no flying back then. There was no flying available, at least not to him. Flying was available for like tier guys, but wasn't available for him. So he had to drive 250 miles to pick up his check just to try to pay his bills. And then he had to drive 250 miles back. The Charlotte office that he drove to and from. How crazy is that? He talked about Jim Herd. He said Jim Herd should have stayed in the pizza industry. He basically hurt the wrestling business when he got involved in it. Talked about the differences between Jim Herd, Ole Anderson. Talked about how Ole was just a little bit too old school. He could appreciate it, but Ole was just way too hardcore old school. He really needed to adapt to new teachings, new thinkings, and really take a step back and look at what the other company was doing, such as the WWF at the time. He was asked about the Benoit murders, and Teddy Long had talked about how he knew kind of like right from the start it was a little bit taboo, kind of raunchy, if you will, when Benoit and Nancy had got together, because he saw how Nancy was with Kevin Sullivan, and like Nancy was one of those type of people. She had Kevin wrapped around her finger. There was like this one incident Teddy talked about where they were at a restaurant or something, and then Kevin was like trying to eat this steak, and she came up, she took a fork, and she just put that bad boy, I think it was right through the steak, like very close to his hand. The fork came very close to going through his hand, but it went through the steak instead. And she scared him shitless, according to Teddy. It was Kevin that was scared shitless. And, there was this one time where, Nancy and Benoit, they like got paired up, cause you know how it was back then, valets and the talent, you know, they worked together all the time, kind of like what he was doing and everything. But he knew that once the two of them got to the hotel room, those first couple of times where it was just business related, he knew that something was going to grow out of it. He really wasn't sure what to make about the Benoit murders. He definitely felt that it was just very tragic, but he noted that after Nancy had got with Benoit, her personality had changed from for the better, that she ended up becoming a pretty nice person. From there, something I thought was very interesting was the origins of Wildman Mark Merrow when he became Johnny B. Bad. Originally, Dusty Rhodes, get this, Dusty Rhodes wanted to call him Tutti Frutti. Can you just imagine that? So listen here, Mark. I got the coolest name for you, Daddy. We're gonna start calling you Tutti Frutti, okay? When you Tutti Frutti, when you do your dance, you're gonna shake a little booty and all that. We'll call you Tutti Frutti. Can you just imagine that? And like Mark Merrow, he went up to Teddy. He was like, man, I'm excited to be here and everything, but Dusty wants to call me Tutti Frutti. I'm not feeling that. And Teddy Long, like right there on the spot, he started coming up with a little bit of a rhyme, and like Johnny B. Bad came out and he ran it through Dusty, and Dusty was like, yeah, okay, that's what we're gonna call you then. We'll call you Johnny B. Bad. And for a hot minute, if you guys recall, Teddy Long, he was managing Mark Merrow, as Johnny B. Bad, but they kind of felt that Mark Merrow was better as a single star. So they like quickly like tore that apart. And it's kind of funny too, because eventually Booty Girl would kind of end up being the valet for Johnny B. Bad. He also talked about the infamous Paul Orndorff, Big Van Vader, incident. You guys probably know about that one, or at least you should. Bill Watts was brought up. Question on if Bill Watts was racist. Teddy talked about, he shared this one story that was really interesting. Basically, he was talking about how Grizzly Smith had told Watts that Junkyard Dog was getting ready to go to the WWF. And Teddy had overheard this, I believe, because he was inside of a restroom, and Bill Watts had said to Grizzly Smith, I'm not worried about him. That nigger ain't going anywhere. So I'm sure you guys heard about the rumors about Bill Watts possibly being a racist, but then it's kind of countered when you look at Bill Watts bringing in Ernie the Cat Ladd as a booker. That was like unprecedented, something that like was never heard of before. Definitely pissed off a lot of people in the business when Ernie had became a booker. It was very, very taboo. He talked about working with Eric Bischoff, like when it first came to announcing, talking about how Eric Bischoff was actually a very nice guy, and just noted how once Bischoff came into more and more and more power, Bischoff started changing personality wise, and it just ended up becoming a situation where Bischoff kind of forgot about those that helped him along the way to get to where he is now. One thing that was kind of interesting about Teddy Long was the way he kind of came off like, I don't want to say self-righteous, but he kind of came off high and mighty. He acted as if he was like a Paul Bearer, or if he was like the Shawn Michaels of managing and refereeing and everything. You just can't help but kind of come away with like a little bit of arrogance from him. And I say that with all due respect. I understand the great strides that he made to get involved in the wrestling business, and how literally he started from like the bottom up to being in a position where ultimately he would be with the WWE for 14 years. That's a hell of a run. And he started off as a manager, as a referee in the WWE before managing Mark Henry, Rodney Mack. And he shared an interesting story about as far as why Rodney Mack was released. Basically, long story short, Rodney Mack had got into an altercation with Hurricane Shane Helms. And as far as Teddy was concerned, put your hands on the white boy. That's pretty much it. Your job is over. Another thing that was very interesting was that, at least per Vince McMahon, Teddy was supposed to have a job for life in the WWE. However, with new people in charge, they decided that it was time to cut ties. Interesting stuff right there. When I was checking that out, it was kind of like, okay. He expressed frustration with what's going on with Damien Sandow. Led to the impression that this was taped just a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of months after his departure from the WWE, but he talked candidly about what is going on with Damien Sandow, how he started off on such a good note, but that now it's like, what's going on with this guy is very frustrating. Love the position of Daniel Bryan and how he's just been able to come up and everything. There's really nothing juicy, nothing really you can sink your teeth into, as far as, wow, that was pretty eye-opening. That was pretty revealing. Like, not even from like a dirt situation, just a overall, wow, this was a really great shoot. For me, it just really came off a little bit flat, a lot flat. I gotta be honest, very flat. I'm surprised the shoot interview lasted as long as it did. I would have thought it would have been a lot less, like maybe 45 minutes. I mean, just the whole, that's the thing with these RF video shoots, man. I would just love it if Rob wouldn't go over like, alright, so 1945 was when you were conceived. It was when your mom and dad first had sex and you were in your mom's womb as a result. And then month 6, 3 months before you came out of your mom's belly, you did something inside the belly where, I guess her water broke. And I mean, he just goes over this long, extravagant chronological order. And then like when you hear just naturally, organically, these people on these shoot interviews, time and time again, when organically what they're talking about blends into something else, you're like, oh, okay, this is interesting. Rob is always quick to go, well, I was going to ask you about that later on. We'll talk about that later on. But for now, he just does like this chronological, and it's like, shake it up once in a while. If you're going to do some type of a timeline thing and all that, then maybe we should kind of like let it be a fucking timeline. Maybe we should retitle the RF shoot interview series and just call it RF timelines with, kind of do it that way. But I wish he would kind of shake it up once in a while, man. I really, really do. Otherwise, for the most part, his shoots are good, but this Teddy Long one, I would say skip this unless you see that it's available for like $5 or something like that. I'm not saying it's bad. You just don't really come away learning a lot, unfortunately. It's just one of those type of situations.
Thanks for listening. An Infinity One Productions presentation, keeping it honest, insightful, and interactive.